Gosh, I'm just so humbled by Katie. We're all just in the trenches. We are cultural workers, and anyway, I'm very, very glad to be here, and we're going to kick it off. You're going to see, this is going to be a continuous loop of all of the works that were in the retrospective. The Color of Being, El Color del Ser, Dorothy Hood, is the first critical overview of Hood's life and art and establishes her as a vital link between Texas, Latin America, New York, and Europe. The exhibition included over 160 paintings, drawings, and collages gathered for the first time ever from important private and museum collections across the country. The Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, the Everson Museum of Art, Syracuse, New York, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, the Dallas Museum of Art, the Addison Gallery of American Art, Andover, Mass. The exhibition also coalesced the expansive body of works from the holdings of the Art Museum of South Texas, Corpus Christi. Taken together, the book published by Texas A&M University Press and the exhibition trace the career of the Texas artist spanning from the 1930s until her death in 2000. This is monumental. What we embarked on had never been attempted in the history of Texas art. A full-scale retrospective that took up an entire museum and a monograph of a woman painter, one of our own. Hood's highly idiosyncratic and emotionally forceful paintings, which form the bridge between the strains of Latin and European surrealism and New York abstraction, were a major achievement in post-war art and deserve to be remembered. They track the development of Hood's unique spatial context and psychic orientation that evoke vast energy fields with vertiginous ruptures of hard edge, opaque passages, and sensuous veils of color. Constant throughout is an impression as strong and invisible as a force field of physical and psychic concentration. It radiates from the dozens of fiercely obsessive ink drawings described in lines with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, and from paintings in which tectonic plates seemingly scrape over one another to release tremors of seismic energy. Hood once told me that she wanted the viewer of her most powerful paintings to hear the drums beat and the lions roar. She was referring to an aliveness of participation, a wholehearted effort to grab art by the horns and to hang on for the wild ride. For some 5 decades, her primary subjects were the physical and mental landscape and the connections between outer and inner worlds. For Hood, the void represented the contemplative and the meditative, but also far broader implications. Not just a black hole of despair, but a space of potentiality, a kind of silent scream, a pitch so high that it shakes the very ground you stand on. It's a space left behind, but also a space of the psyche, a conduit of energy and memory of other realities. The limitlessness of space, the phenomenon of light and strange new terrains of galactic visions, precipitous and jagged shapes in broad flows of color and luminous encrustations, are pitched against a raw surface, seemingly tearing open a space in the brain beyond all that may be imagined. That energy-explosive dynamic of Hood's art operated in her most successful paintings, And to experience the physical mechanics of her art up close is thrilling. To confront and engage with it is to meet the person as much as to visit the work on canvas. Hood always acknowledged her formal sources and influences. Gorky, Brancusi, Munch, Ensor, Matisse, Picasso, Redon, Max Ernst, as well as her intensive studies of myth, science, nature, and spirituality, Christianity and Hinduism in particular. She has been called a symbolist, a metaphysical artist, an abstract surrealist. Hood's position in art history, however, was compromised by time and place. She spent too much of her life outside of New York, but her failure to achieve the kind of recognition that her work calls for can also be directly attributed to sexist attitudes rampant among critics and artists alike during the 1950s and 1960s. Hood matured in a male-dominated artistic environment to which few, if any, women were admitted. Her art is a lifelong essay on the theme of freedom, what it looks like, what must be sacrificed to achieve and maintain it. What Hood's paintings, drawings, and collages powerfully reveal is an emotionally intricate portrait of the artist as a young woman, through maturity, and then old age. Conflicted, self-conscious, deeply thoughtful, a seeker after an understanding of her own place in the world. Hood was an artist with the spirit of a fighter and a poet. Born in Bryan, Texas, she was brought up in Houston. At a time when tea parties and white gloves were de rigueur, Hood embraced change as a liberating force that satisfied her avid curiosity about life. She found her focus early, and right from childhood, she never wanted to be anything but an artist. Hood won a 4-year scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design in the mid-1930s, then worked as a model in New York City to earn money for classes at the Art Students League. Seemingly on a whim, she drove a roadster from New York to Mexico City with 2 friends in 1941 and ended up staying nearly 2 decades. Barely in her 20s, Hood was not afraid to break boundaries in her search for freedom. She was front and center to the cultural, political, and social crossroads of Mexico during a period of intense creative ferment. Hood maintained close relationships with European exiles and Latin American surrealists, composers, poets, revolutionary writers, and artists. Her circle included the Spanish author Ramon Sender, to whom she was briefly engaged, Russian novelist Victor Serge, playwright Sophie Treadwell, the painters Remedios Varo and Leonora Carrington, as well as Rufino Tamayo, Jose Luis Cuevas, Matias Goretz, and Jose Clemente Orozco, with whom Hood developed a very deep friendship. Pablo Neruda wrote a poem about Hood on the occasion of her 1943 exhibition at Galería de Arte María Asunción, or Gamma Gallery, which was attended by the leading painters, writers, and film stars of Mexico. It's important to note that Hood exhibited with a number of these artists at the Proteo Gallery and the first Salon of International Experimental Art. Hood's work is about being within or passing through, inside the body, behind the mind's eye, gazing into infinity, or whirling through the cosmos. Vines, thorns, insects, birds, beaks, eyes, molecules, nebulae, and orbs. The symbols are anchored and floating, expanding and contracting. All of these undergo continuous metamorphosis in time and space, body and spirit. Through the use of symbols, the language of sacred art, Hood undertakes a heroic quest to uncharted realms. Symbols function mainly as enchantments for our sensibilities, enticing us to pay close attention and then to be led inward toward deeper and fuller dimensions of being. Her works are permeated with themes that emphasize psychic experience as transmitted through primordial and mythic and ritual acts, referring to dramas of birth, death, war, sex, and faith. They are the meeting ground for a variety of conflicting impulses represented by flesh-eating monsters and astrodynamic satellites, spiny forms and streamlined shapes, biomorphic growth, and technological brutishness. For Hood, art was a conveyor of some magical force, but it had to distill one's reality, make it available to others, and move in that sense from sharply observed specificities to the generality of full comprehension. It had to form a connective tissue. This is what Hood's art aims to do: to give new life to our lost psychic and spiritual balance, and to pose new questions about archetypal images, which let us descend through layers of consciousness and which are received by our own experiences. Hood opens our eyes and our senses, revealing something within us that was previously hidden. What Hood does in all of her paintings and drawings is create reverberative images that reach into the very depth of being, resonating in time, flowing on, and ultimately changing. To discover who we are and what the nature of our being is, we must go beyond our experience to where time ceases to quicken and memory and space is everything. The title of the book in retrospective, The Color of Being, El Color del Ser, proposes that who we are is changeable, malleable, and mutation is central to identity. It is this malleable back and forth between self and asserted identity that composes a world in which people, animals, and things capriciously move and change. We are, all of us, in constant passage with one another. The question is, to what degree we are alienated from the environment in which we interact, and by extension, how we recover our fragile moments of connection. Hood's art propels us across the emotional, psychological, and physical landscapes of the human condition. She touched on almost every aspect of experience. So who is the real Dorothy Hood? I began this project 5 years ago. I was confronted at the Art Museum of South Texas with 3 pallets in its vault. Each was 6 feet by 6 feet, hundreds of boxes, all shrink wrapped. And each box, I can tell you, was like opening a Pandora's box. I thought I knew Dorothy. I'd spent considerable time with her in the early 80s, mid-1980s in her studio. I published one of the last interviews before her passing. But it turned out I didn't know her at all. I found a gold mine of materials in these boxes. She kept everything. I'm talking every Christmas card, every bill, every postcard, every note. Thousands of pages, eyewitness accounts, stories, journals, what she was thinking, what she was experiencing, letters and correspondence with collectors, but also with museum directors and curators. 28 years of correspondence with Dorothy Miller, the Museum of Modern Art New York's preeminent curator, as well as Marion Willard, the preeminent New York art dealer. She took a big bite out of life, but also the boxes were filled with inconsistent dates, titles, and multiple versions of the same stories. What I learned through all of that, going through every single one of those boxes, is the importance of an archive. In this age of coding, texting, emailing, such personal and handwritten letters won't exist in the future. I learned that museums over the decades had published her wrong birth year. Hood was born in 1918, not 1919. This was discovered in a letter to her mother from the 1950s, in which Hood complained that MoMA had asked for a birth date, which she decided would be a year younger. I mean, why 1 year for some reason? She got angry about it and then decided never to change it. I also learned that at Camp Waldemar, yes, Dorothy Hood was a Comanche at Camp Waldemar, she excelled at tennis, rode horses, and received a marksmanship certificate from the National Rifle Society. She also designed all of the invitations and menus for Camp Waldemar for the Texas Centennial in 1936. After RISD, Hood went to Manhattan, where she literally danced on the rooftops. She saw all the museum exhibitions, including the extremely significant 20 Centuries of Mexican Art at the Museum of Modern Art. She had sharp antennae. Mexico City in the early 1940s was like Paris in the 20s. Her journals and correspondence reveal stories upon stories. I found out that Hood met her husband, Bolivian composer Velasco Maidana, at the home of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. I also discovered that her mother traveled by bus from Houston to Mexico City at least 3 times to try to bring her home. But Hood was protected by Hollywood film stars and producers who were living there at the time, and she was accepted unconditionally. I think Dorothy, at this point, had gone full tilt bohemian. In many ways, Hood was one of our first trans-border artists. She took risks and maintained standards. She had to hold the line, even as she went over the line. And we are the beneficiaries of her self-inventing, reckless grace. So how does an artist sustain a unique visual language over a lifetime? We live in a remix culture. Fashion, film, music, art are continuously sampled and resampled to the point that there's really nothing new out there. So why does the art of Dorothy Hood matter in the 21st century? She painted with conviction, integrity, a compelling authenticity. She never stopped working. Nobody of her generation ranged so far with such breadth. She tells us to be an artist is a lifetime commitment, not just a career choice. She enables us to address what fine art really is. It's making careful decisions. It's taking the right measures, then putting them out there in the world. She knew that painting must be miraculous and required faith. She took the measures of the world and the cosmos. So there is a sense of continually unfolding mystery and a continuity of personal language. She had great touch. The brushwork and fencing strokes and pours could be fast, assured, eloquent, or she could caress the paint. Her paintings are an invitation to communal experience, an expression of urgency, exclamations of wonder. She's an artist to be argued for. Like many interesting and overlooked artists, and with this book and retrospective, I tried to take on that job with care, eloquence, and most important, passion, which in cases like this is what finally carries the day. So what did she see? What did she experience? What did she know? And how is that manifested in the work? Dorothy Hood was attuned to the vibrations of the universe. People are hungry for that kind of visionary power. People want some kind of spiritual connection. Curators and registrars of major museums across the country were mesmerized by Hood's backstory when I traveled to view the work in vaults or storage facilities. When I would start talking about her backstory, all of a sudden they would gather in a crowd. At the Whitney Museum in New York, for example, they brought out one of her drawings, an enigmatic vessel. It had never been seen before. It was unframed. It was just me and the registrar. As I started talking about the drawing, other people started joining us around the table. And then all of a sudden, everyone stopped working in the Whitney warehouse, and there was an audience mesmerized by Dorothy Hood. Private collectors had their own personal stories about Hood, or from living with her art, sometimes for decades. All opened their homes to me. They seemed to regard Hood's work as a family member. An exhibition of this magnitude will never come together again, not like what we accomplished. My aim was to establish Hood as a major 20th century American artist. I've said this over and over in every talk or lecture that I've given, that Texas will never be considered a major art center until its artists and its history are honored and documented. Thanks to all of you for participating in that endeavor just by being here tonight. But if not for the Art Museum of South Texas, her archive, okay, I'm talking thousands of pages of journals, letters, and extremely important notes, letters from the astronaut Alan Bean, letters from Jose Clemente Orozco, 28 years of correspondence between Dorothy and Dorothy Miller and the major figures of the 20th century, okay? All of that would have gone to the dumpster, and this book would never have been written. There is a paradigm shift in American art, what it was, is, or could be. We're veering away from fixed categories and hierarchies and what we think we know of an artist. The book is a journey through her life. So much art slides out of our minds as soon as we see it. It demands nothing. But Hood demands that we give ourselves over to her unrelenting visions full stop. She also comes at you full throttle in her most powerful epic paintings with physical fervor. This was her salvation and what makes her an important artist to come to terms with. She is so insistent on doing what she does in spite of whatever trends come and go, that her art now exists as a champion island in the mainstream for artists. Every artist will one day face the moment when he or she is doing what he or she does after the style has passed and the art world's star-making machine has moved on. Hood affirms that the only thing an artist can do is remain true to whatever vision, talent, or ideas that happen to pick them in order to be made known to the world. Hood had bracing views about art, about life, and the big themes: birth, death, nature, myth, history, science. In the course of her life, she had known a great number of people, famous, infamous, and otherwise. To be a painter requires enormous discipline and an astonishing determination needed to carry on painting decade after decade through every sort of discouragement every day. Her whole career was a tremendous gamble on her own talent. Emotional honesty versus living form. Well, that wasn't a dividing issue for her. Her paintings are ever-changing versions of what could be done with pigment. And her art is about what happens when art and life meet, not because it's a cool idea, but because there is no choice. Hood's art conveys a depth of thought and feeling that seems unavailable in a lot of art now, and evident in countless varieties and retreads of modernist painting in all kinds of flavors. It's zombie formalism, it's crapstraction, it's all market product, eye candy, desserts. By contrast, Hood's work feels grounded in realities larger than life itself. For art in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, there was New York, and that was it. Or so we thought. Well, it's wrong. One thing recent globally minded art history has taught us: after World War II, new art, and lots of it, was turning up in cities everywhere. Hood reminds us that sanctified art movements aside, most artists worthy of the name are loners and renegades. They operate without licenses or PhDs, striving to be themselves as only they can be, as intensely as possible. We get what we tend to look for in art, something we haven't quite seen before, the sight of a unique individual exploring her uniqueness to the hilt. For the most part, the few women who broke through all had successful male artists opening the way. Well, it doesn't matter in the long run how Dorothy compares to other women artists. When you get down to it, it's the men with whom she stacks up against. And in my opinion, her most powerful paintings go tooth and toenail with the best of them. Although so many people have tried to categorize Dorothy, early Texas modernist, color field painter, and so on, she's not so easily slotted and slips between all of these labels. Her achievement was to develop a personal language in her art and then carry it all the way through, no matter the trends or prevailing styles. She didn't always hit it out of the park, but she was fearless in striving to those heights. There are very few artists out there today who know art as some deep part of themselves and sacrificed for it over a lifetime. We are the beneficiaries of Dorothy's vast knowledge. When we stand in front of her paintings, we are astonished. After all these decades, it's her final test, and I think it's breathtaking. We live in an age of revival. Well, not every overlooked artist whose work has languished is justly ignored. Was her critical fate sealed by her choice to live in Houston? Would she have achieved national prominence if she moved to New York? The jury's still out. It's complicated and can be viewed from a number of angles. She contended on a vast playing field with the greatest artists of our time. What made Hood who she was, and her art what it is? Hood's work, in the end, is about the transitoriness of all things, of all existence, and all art. At the same time, she captures those strange, sacred moments that seem to stand outside of time, the rare glimpses into eternity. Her painting is not so much the message as the magnet, one that snares our attention, compels us to sort through both the vivid details and underlying layers of meaning, intention, and process. It reminds us that we are collectively engaged in some enormous, cosmically significant endeavor of whose nature hardly any one of us has an inkling. The very purpose of art is to keep changing its questions. What are the questions? Who am I? What is the nature of my being? The questions change as the audience changes. Dorothy asked questions throughout her life. What is spirit? What is science? What is poetry? What is man? Who am I? What Dorothy Hood tells us is that identity is not fixed and one's story is never over. Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, I'll be here all weekend to answer. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, it's behind. Yes.
Can you give a little bit about the massive sizes and...
Yes. Well, Dorothy, after 1969, and all of this is in the book, but after 1969, let me back up. She and Velasco, her husband, moved permanently back to Houston in 1962. And you have to realize when they were living in Mexico, it was under extreme poverty. She mostly did drawing. She had no materials. They would move often. to work on paintings. And actually, Lefty Adler, who was director of the Contemporary Arts Museum at the time, visited Dorothy in her studio. And in the book, in fact, Dorothy, I had her on tape at one point, described Lefty on the floor, wallowing and saying, "You should go bigger, you should go bigger." And so he got a studio for her, and she started doing 10-foot epic paintings that she really could never see until they got to the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston in 1970. And she said they were literally flying up in the air. So the drawings, like I said, were like with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, and she would work from very small to this epic scale and back again, expanding, contracting. But the thing about Dorothy Hood, and I'm glad you asked about that, is important. What I found over and over and over, and I have seen literally hundreds and hundreds of Dorothy Hood paintings, that the bigger she got, the better she got. I mean, she could really handle that space edge to edge. Yes?
I didn't catch if she's still alive.
No, she passed in 2000. She died of cancer, breast cancer in 2000.
Okay, so 1918.
Yes. But and this is still happening. Most museums still has her incorrect birth date, so I'm saying everybody change it. 1918. Found her baptismal certificate, and when I was saying, I was going through all these boxes. These were moldy boxes. What I had to go through every single piece of paper. But again, the gold mine that I found, the history, our history, that removes us from this kind of regional provincialism stigma that we've been suffering in Texas, that all of us have been working decades to overcome, to something of real international importance. When I say she knew, I mean, here she was from Bryan, Texas, okay? And she met the leading figures of the 20th century, from astronauts who took painting lessons from her, studio visits with Alan Bean, walking on the moon. I have a letter from him saying that her paintings confirmed his experiences in outer space. To Arthur C. Clarke, the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The most important artists of our time. She, met Mark Rothko. She worked in Europe. The 22 years in Mexico, my goodness, all that she saw. It's all in the book. I mean, all of these stories. And when I said I thought I knew Dorothy, when I kept going through these boxes, when I said, who is the real Dorothy Hood? It was in all of these very detailed thousands of pages of journals. And that's who the real Dorothy, she was recording her dreams, her experiences, and I read every single one of them. Does anybody else have any questions?
I do. 2 questions. One, is she related to Wood County in Texas? Is there any relationship?
No.
And the second one is, her process looks so there's some parts of it were sort of happenstance, and you kind of just were happened, and she created the rest of it. Did she throw a lot of her work away, or did she keep everything and just work on it where she liked it?
She kept everything. She kept everything. And here's the problem, okay, with that. I mean, it's good on the archive, and all of us need to be aware of that. We need to be producing books in Texas, all right? That's what I'm saying. We need to honor and document our artists and our history. We need to preserve all of this important information. So I mean, my goodness, it took me a year to go through every single piece of paper, but I'm so glad we did. She kept that, and she kept all of her work. Now, when I say she didn't always hit it out of the park, okay, I can tell a transitional Dorothy Hood from a mint, museum caliber Dorothy Hood. I know exactly what she was doing. And sometimes when you keep all of that work, which is a good thing, people need to understand there needs to be like teaching collections. I think viewers out there have the idea that an artist just, well, of course, it just, you go from A to B and, you make this painting and it's all spectacular. Well, everybody knows, I mean, even Picasso had bad days, but some of those paintings get out, all right, which should be kept aside as studio transitional work, how she got from one painting to another, what she was doing in one corner, how she worked it out, resolved, and brought it all, to a great resolution. So she did keep everything, and fortunately, the Art Museum of South Texas has the estate and several hundred paintings, collages, drawings, and in the course of even putting this retrospective together, we found a cache of 60 drawings that hadn't ever been seen before. And all of the archive, which I hope will be preserved and organized and honored. So in the future, scholars, artists, anyone can go and study this remarkable artist.
How did the archive end up in Corpus Christi in the first place?
Well, I'm going to have to, I'm always truthful, okay? To a fault. All right, Dorothy, Dorothy didn't always make great decisions, and she didn't always have great taste in men, okay? All right? I mean, it's just who she was, okay? And late in life, she had a partner who kind of took over the estate, and he became beneficiary of that, her house and studio and the contents. And so he wanted to make sure a museum took the entire contents on. Sometimes that's difficult for a museum. That's a responsibility, all right? It's not to be taken lightly. That's when you take that on, you are the responsible steward for perpetuity. So a couple of museums, I understand, passed on it because they didn't have the storage. They couldn't do it. William Otten, the director at the time of the Art Museum of South Texas, was approached by this person, and he, thank goodness, recognized what a gold mine this would be and the importance. And he made it happen. Bill Otten, Michelle Locke, who was curator at the time, went and packed up the studio, the boxes, all of that. But when I'm saying, if that hadn't happened, if the Art Museum of South Texas did not take that on, all of that would have gone to the dumpster. I mean, literally, the book would not have been written. All of that information would have gone through the cracks. So again, it's important for artists to document. It's important to hold on to these journals and letters and correspondence for future history. And to answer your question too, the Art Museum in South Texas had been holding on to this for, they acquired it, I think all in all 2 years after Dorothy's death. And we're waiting to figure out what to do with this. You know, do you do a small show? Do you do the big retrospective? And in this sense, it was time to do the big retrospective and get this book done. Anybody else? Oh.
Susie, thank you for doing this great work. I've always wondered why Dorothy Hood wasn't as well-known, famous as Georgia O'Keeffe. And I'm sure, I mean, that's probably an unanswerable question. I mean, I don't know what the mechanics were that prevented Dorothy Hood from having that kind of acknowledgement and understanding of her art during her own time.
Wow, Francine, that is a really great question, and it's one that people ask me almost every week. I mean, we're still grappling with all of that. And because Dorothy was given a lot. I mean, she had shows in New York. Marion Willard, who showed David Smith, Paul Klee, Mark Tobey, you know, I mean, the major artists. She was the only woman artist who was given a show in 1950. She had Dorothy Miller at her back. She had a show at Tibor Nanaj, all right? She was in Mexico with Jose Clemente Orozco. She was in Europe at the Tato Ehrenberg Atelier with Christo and Mark Tobey and, you know, all of these people. So she was given a lot. But here's the thing. Again, she was a woman. She was in Houston when that period truly mattered, when she really needed to break away. And she had a dealer at the time, and one who she stayed with for nearly 30 years, who some people say didn't do enough to push her forward. Now, she did get, and the dealer made certain of this, the work was in collection, 30 major collections from coast to coast, California to New York. Philadelphia Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Addison, RISD, the Museum of Modern Art New York, San Diego, Santa Barbara, you know, and every institution in Texas. But you have to go back to the times, I think. All the art critics were male. And in the book, I go through this because I sort of remembered, and Dorothy was talking about it. She had a real kind of flirtatious back and forth in the early 70s with Clement Greenberg. And thinking, okay, you know, he wanted something else, I think, all right, very flirtatious. And I think she was thinking, you know, maybe he will help me break through. But also Dorothy was kind of her own worst enemy, all right? She was so fiercely independent. Like there was one letter, Walter Darby Bannard was saying, you know, don't paint the void. The void is literally nothing. You know, do something else. Well, you know, she wasn't going to do that. She was going to stay true to who she was. And it's kind of followed her. You know, the difficulty about this book and this retrospective is that the work had never been edited. She had some major exhibitions in the early 70s, one at the Everson in Syracuse, at the McName Museum in the 70s, but she hadn't had the big one, and nobody would put together this book. In fact, when I first started, this one very well-respected curator said, oh, I heard you're taking this on. Well, good luck with that, you know. But look, we did it. It's proven what can happen, the potential here. And I think Dorothy still needs to be looked at, especially with all the, you know, the revival of the 70s work, the big paintings, this woman painter from Texas, and all of her backstory, which was never known. So I think that's an ongoing issue, though. And here's the other thing, the part B to that with George O'Keeffe and all of that. Again, many of those women artists had male artists behind them. Helen Frankenthaler had Robert Motherwell. George O'Keeffe had Stieglitz. You know, I mean, it's just, that's the way it went. And Dorothy was in Houston. It was a time when her husband, the esteemed composer, Bolivian composer Velasco Maidana, you know, he had Alzheimer's. You know, she had to be the breadwinner. She had to stay put. So it's very complex. But what I'm seeing out there now that is still a danger signal, there's a lot of, all of a sudden, group shows of women artists. There was one in Denver last summer. There's one up at the Museum of Modern Art New York right now, okay? And what I'm seeing is they're corralling these big shows of women painters post-World War II, okay? Which is really nice. It's wonderful. It's finally happening. But why do women have to be all corralled together? Can't we do big exhibitions of a single woman artist? Can't we look at this and take them individually? I think it's time. So, Francine, yes, that's an important question, and it's one we have to keep asking all the time, because Dorothy Hood's best paintings, I think, are right on that same level. Does anybody else have any questions? Or thank you very much.